Join Edwin Frondozo on the Business Leadership Podcast every week for a unique program featuring insights and actionable items from the world's most successful business leaders. Hear firsthand the exclusive interviews and personal journeys on how today's transformational leaders made it to the top.
At the leadership level, you're actually motivating and you're convincing a group of people to get up every day and give it everything they've got. Mm-hmm. And to do that, you have to give them a good reason to do that. And for me, that reason is so that they'll know you're always there for them. Knowing that you are there for them is super important. And to do that, you have to live all the values that you have asked them to live.
This is the Business Leadership Podcast, and I'm your host, Edwin Frondozo. How are you doing? Thank you for taking the time to join me. I'm really happy to have you. In today's episode, I share the conversation I had with Shrad Rao, the CEO of Wagepoint. Wagepoint is a simple payroll software for small businesses that are looking to simplify their payment processes. Shrad shares the main reasons why he became an entrepreneur, some of the tips that help him keep his culture intact, despite the fact that they are a 100% remote workforce. We dive into the benefits of diversifying your workforce. Today's episode is brought to you by Slingshot, a Canadian telecommunications leader in business VoIP services that empowers the emerging and innovative companies. Slingshot ensures that companies are communicating clearly to their customers, team members, and stakeholders. Unlike traditional telcos and other cloud providers, Slingshot understands what it takes to grow and scale a business. To learn more, go to slingshotvoip.com/TBLP. And with that, here we go. Welcome to the Business Leadership Podcast, Shrad.
Hey, Edwin, how are you?
I'm doing well. Super excited to have you. Just a quick story for all of you out there. Shrad and I are basically coming full circle, and I have the opportunity to interview him. Me and him met years ago when we were both starting up our tech startups, and here we are full circle, and I get to share his story. Shrad, so welcome to the show. Can you actually start off by introducing yourself? Tell us maybe a little bit something about who you are and what you like to do when you're not growing and scaling Wagepoint.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Shrad, as you know. I'm the CEO of Wagepoint. So basically that means I run the business, and sometimes the business runs me, depending on the day. What do I like to do when I'm not running the business? That's a great question. Honestly, I think it's only been recently since I've even been able to think about what I can do outside of the business, because it's come to a place where it's somewhat stable. So right now I'm exploring everything from yoga to Lindy Hop, taking some lessons, or improv, basically sharpening all the skills that, help me, just help me feel like that energy, so that I'm not sitting at the desk all day, and so I get to actually expend some of the vast stores of energy that I come with.
Yeah, that sounds fun, actually. I've been meaning to do something like that as well.
Done. We'll be dance partners next.
Let's do it. Let's start off with Wagepoint. Tell us about Wagepoint. I know you mentioned you're running the business, and maybe if you'd like, share what you're trying to accomplish over the next 6 to 12 months.
Sure. Yeah. So Wagepoint sort of is the culmination of my entrepreneurship dream, or hopefully it's chapter 1 in my entrepreneurship journey. It's so I was one of those guys that was always going to be an entrepreneur my whole life, or at least since I was consciously able to think about what I want to do with my time. I've always loved the ability to control my own future, but also influence change, and most importantly, really manage the company I keep, or curate the company I keep. I really believe that, if you surround yourself with the right people and the right attitudes, you will always do better than if you let that be chosen for you. Mm-hmm. So this has been a huge part of why I was driven to become an entrepreneur. And for me, I mean, I know a lot of people have these brilliant stories about, you're brushing their teeth and then one day they realize electric toothbrushes are everything, right? Um,
Yeah.
but I don't have like a product moment or a moment where I was thinking, this thing has to be invented. For me, it was more about what is out there in the world that is not being done well for a certain group of people that I can create a wedge by doing it better. And so when I looked at the payroll industry and I saw these legacy companies that have been doing it for a long time, and they were kind of doing it for everybody, small businesses, medium business, large businesses, I was like, I have a feeling they're probably at the size that they are. They're probably treating customers like numbers. And I don't want to call out anyone specifically, but there's like, these companies have been in the business for a very long time. So they come with a mentality that is different than the one that I think I would bring. And so the reason that I started the company, and I know this now more as I'm growing older and I'm understanding the reasons why I do anything a little bit better, is I actually wanted to build something that I could be proud of, fully in control of, or as much as possible, and essentially fix a problem that I thought was existing for a specific group of people. In our case, that became the small business community. So we never looked at the medium-sized businesses or enterprise businesses, and we never get tempted to go in that direction either. We stay in the space that we know because we love the group of people that we work with. And that's a very large group of people. So anyway, sorry, you see, I can be very passionate when I talk about this.
No, I love it. Thank you.
Yeah. So the reason, I guess what I'm trying to say is that people start businesses for all kind of reasons. I knew exactly why I was going to do what I did. And I really wanted to build a community. That's really what the business meant for me. A community of people related to customers as well as employees, and then be able to live life on my terms. And that's sort of, the why behind Wagepoint. Now, like I said, when you take a specific industry and you think you could do that better, then it almost like you don't wait for the perfect situation. You just look for all the tweaks you can make to essentially get yourself to get yourself in the market as quickly as possible and get feedback from customers. So that's sort of like the philosophy that I've taken from day one.
No, that's great. That's great. What's really interesting to me is, this philosophy and creating this culture and serving in this community. I'd love to get your thoughts in terms of like, how, I heard a term that how you are building the world's friendliest team. I mean, from what you're saying, that sounds like that's almost the core of everything in your philosophy. So why is that important? And how do you really scale that?
Yeah, dude, I totally, and I use the word philosophy because it's such a big deal. It's such a big part of how I think about life. The way I think about building the business and the way I think about life is not dissimilar. In fact, it's very, very much the same. The reason I said world's friendliest team is because from the first day, there's two things. Culture has been a very deliberate thing at Wagepoint from day one. It hasn't been an afterthought. I've known exactly the kind of environment that I want to build for people to participate in and enjoy. And I'm talking about employees. So how do you build something that, like, when you put a group of people together and if you don't give them any sort of playbook, people start acting like, crazy people, right?
Right.
And so what I've done is from day one, I've made a very deliberate handshake almost with every single person that I've hired to say, this is how we're going to behave. This is how we're going to comport ourselves inside of the company. Are you cool with that? Or not only are you cool with that, do you love that? Will you defend that yourself at some point? And that handshake has actually been one of the best decisions I've ever made, which is essentially telling somebody what it is that you're looking for, getting their buy-in as to the fact that they also want the same thing, and then you both going about your business, living that life. So that is sort of, just from a philosophical standpoint, like I said, culture has been something that is a day one thing. And the second thing is, I totally can empathize with the customer, especially a small business customer, as to what it must feel like for the first time they become an employer. If you think about it, right, you get into the business of you have a cupcake shop, you're interested in making cupcakes, right? You're not really interested in the administrative stuff. And then when you have when you have a cupcake shop, you're not only, in sales and marketing for all of that stuff, but you're also an employer. Suddenly now you've gone from being like a regular person who has no responsibilities and obligations to anybody to these massive amounts of responsibilities and obligations. And some of them can get you into some serious trouble, right? You could get sued. You could get, you could have to pay massive fines for tax issues. So for me, the idea of a small business owner having to feel like when they wrote into us or sent a ticket or even called in, when they call us, we are assuming that they don't know a lot about payroll because it's not a core function for them, and yet they have to know something about it, if not a lot about it. So when they call into us, it should feel like they're calling a friend, and you phone a friend, have a question answered, or you write into a friend. That's what it should feel like. And so from the get-go, the idea has been, we know payroll is highly inaccessible to a lot of people because, it has to do with regulations and math, things people don't usually like. How do we actually how do we make ourselves very approachable and accessible to people so that they can ask us questions and we can help them as a friend would? And that's really where it comes from, the world's friendliest team.
Oh, I see. And I love it. I mean, because you also, from the culture that you part of, or you just, like you said, philosophy, I love that you bringing it in and not really separating your business world and your personal world. And that's things that I resonate with as well. And what's really interesting to me, from what I know about you and your business, and this culture that you've developed, it's around actually, because I talk about future of work all the time, and you built it around a remote workforce.
Yeah, totally.
I want to share your thoughts on, why you did that, some of the challenges that you saw as you were growing this or doing the buy-in, because there's also managerial not problems, but challenges with a remote workforce. And the reason why I'm really focused on this is because as I grow and scale my business, I'm all about not being tied to an office. I'm trying to think of how the future and the future of work. So this is really interesting. So let me know your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, we did this before it was really trendy, right?
Yes.
And so at this point, we have a pretty good process or pretty good cadence for how we actually scale this. And it actually comes back to the whole culture thing. Funny enough, what is really interesting is even though we have a group of we're actually over 60 people, like 60 something.
Wow.
I think this year we'll handily, cross that, depending on, a few factors, we'll probably cross the 80, maybe even close to 100 mark, depending on, a few things that'll happen. But the reality is that inside of our company, the feeling of culture is fully tangible. It is literally something people can feel. Like we did an anonymous survey recently, and of course, of the employees. And one of my favorite quotes that came from it was, why do you like working at Wagepoint? And someone said, because I partly dream about living on a planet of crazy everything, and I kind of see my dream coming true.
I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
And so the reason this was this is such a funny and interesting thing is because the thing that I actually have made sure everyone feels, or the thing that I always talk to everyone about, is I've always wanted to build a kind of company where everyone feels like their real self. Like they can actually bring their real natural self to work. Whoever they are in their homes, with their families, with their friends, that's who they can feel comfortable bringing to the office. It doesn't mean that, obviously they can say and do anything. Like my job as CEO is to build the boundaries of culture. Like some of the things you shouldn't do, right? Like don't be racist, don't be sexist, don't be a jerk, right? Don't hurt anyone. Those are the boundaries. But outside of that, they're adults, right? They're trusted in their everyday life to do things that, adults do. So why would I ask them to become some sort of watered down robot-like version of themselves at work when the best part of them is all of that variety and that diversity and that cool, the people that they are in the regular life. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. Talk to me about how you keep that culture intact of this craziness with the challenges of being a fully remote workforce, like what are the tools, or how do you guys do retreats? I'd love to get, some of the things that you've learned and maybe some of the things that didn't work out.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's tons of things that don't work out, but I'll start with the ones that do. And sorry, I know some of the questions that you're asking me a direct question, and I'm taking an esoteric approach to it. So, for example, how do you build a remote team? And what I said is you focus on culture.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question is, well, how do you build culture when people are not next to each other?
Yes.
Right? Which is kind of a crazy idea. And what I'm saying is that the way that you do it is by having a mutual understanding of how to behave with each other. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
So, for example, here's a simple example. Let's say we're talking to some people for a job. Let's say there's 2 or 3 people. First of all, we don't go to the market and say, here's 1,000 resumes. I mean, can we find 1,000 resumes? We tend to be more selective. Like we will find either referrals or we will use a process to find, to basically do outreach to candidates that we're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And then the first thing that happens is not a skills interview. It's what we call a culture call. So it's basically calling someone to check whether they fit our culture. And that is simply by saying, this is who we are as a group. So we don't talk about what we do. We simply say, this is who we are as a group of people. How do you feel about hearing that? And how do you feel about everything I just told you about who we are as a group? So imagine me as the representative of the entire company, and of all the whole group of people inside of the company, not the functions and the tasks and the skills. Because some of those things, the functions, the tasks and skills are gimmies, right? To have been narrowed down in the first place, you should have had some of that stuff. Like if you're looking for a payroll specialist and you only know how to I don't know, toast bread, that's probably you're not going to make it to the culture call, right? So that's that's sort of a baseline expectation. And then when you're having this call with me, the whole purpose is for me to tell you this group of people that I represent, that is sort of behind me. This is who they are as a group. This is how they think. This is how they behave. This is how we solve problems. This is how we celebrate together. If I told you could come to a place where you could just be yourself and all the things that cause you anxiety in your mind, you could just, let's say that a simple example of things that cause you anxiety is if Edwin and I are talking, will I go and tell someone else that, right? What we just said to each other, right? That's a simple thing that happens in companies all the time. And that's actually what the core of politics is who knows what information. What if I said, I would never, that is not acceptable here. What if I said, you never have to worry about that. So everyone always knows where they stand with the company and where they stand with each other. It's not that there isn't minor, disagreements or even major disagreements, but that's all part of the human experience. There's nothing that's being snuffed out from someone where they are not feeling like themselves. So that culture call is where that is happening. And in that moment, somebody else, the candidate is making a decision as to whether this is the right place for them. And that is the time they're making that handshake where they're saying, if it is the right place, I will also comport myself in this manner. So I will not be the one to start this, to begin the gossiping or to begin the toxicity in the environment. So that's sort of one way in which, if you think about it, if everyone's having this call with me, just think about the amount of uniformity in the way that people are approaching problem solving and hanging out with each other. You see what I'm saying?
Just a few words from our episode sponsor, Slingshot. Business leaders like you are now faced with challenges to ensure that their business and culture are not only profitable, but also a sustainable one. How does your workforce look like? As we move towards the growing gig economy and remote workforce, it is important to work with a communications partner that has the knowledge and experience. Slingshot understands the growing needs of business leaders and partners with you to ensure that your company is aligned with your vision, growth, and sustainability of the future. To learn more, go to slingshot.com/TBLP.
It's just letting down, I guess, the curtains. And this is who we are. Proceed with caution.
Yeah, well, totally. But proceed with your eyes wide open.
Yes.
Know where you're coming. And because when I tell someone that you can walk in here and be your true self, whatever, your natural self, most people who have had to go to let's say a large corporation and sort of be a little bit, let's say stiff,
Yeah.
hide yourself, they tend to relax and they tend to enjoy the environment. And that is the whole, and with payroll, which is very intense, that's actually what allows them to be very friendly with the customers and stuff like that. We get
Right.
tons and tons and tons and tons of messages saying that we're really friendly. This one guy said, "You guys are so kind. Every time you interact with me, I was kind of grumpy. You guys are so kind that now I have to become even more kind than you, just to prove that I can do it."
Nice.
Yeah, so it's sort of almost like a, and I don't want to say it's like a, I don't. It's absolutely, there's no sense of like almost a homogeneity in the company. It's still very eclectic, very disparate. It's because it's really appealing to how humans live as people and not necessarily inside of a corporation. Do you
Right.
understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. I love the concept of the culture call, and you're mentioning that you're taking these calls. So in this capacity, and as you're growing and scaling, Shrad, are you still doing a lot of the screening of the team members that you guys are onboarding now?
I knew you were going to ask me this question, Edwin. Because this is the natural question, right? Is how long can you keep this going for?
Yes.
And if I had said that this was the reason for our success, then my feeling is this is still one of the most important things I can do.
I like that.
I find it very hard, especially in a remote workforce. At the moment, if I'm the glue that is holding all of them together, and then they essentially start to hold each other together. Again, I know this all sounds very esoteric and very millennially,
Mhm.
but this is literally the thing that people don't focus on. Is when they put a group of people together, they don't tell them what is okay and what is not okay. And like, if you think about it, right, when you're kids, you have your parents and your siblings that teach you how to interact with each other. You go to school, you have teachers and other other students to help you interact with each other. You go to college, kind of same thing. You couldn't work, and then the people are just dropped in there, and somehow you're just supposed to all figure it out. This is the difference between the approach I've taken and I would say the traditional approach.
No, that's awesome. What's interesting as well, and maybe it's within every challenge there's opportunities, right? And diversity is a big topic, whether it's hiring young, old, male, female. But with what you're doing with Wagepoint and having this culture around a remote workforce, you also get an opportunity to get diversity in other senses. People from different centers around the world. Can you share with us what you are seeing, some of those benefits that some people don't think about with a remote workforce culture?
Absolutely, yeah. So to your point, the reason we've always been remote is because we're geographically agnostic, right? So we wanted to go where the best person was, as opposed to where we had sort of no choice but to congregate. So that's and with payroll in particular, like it's kind of really important for us to find where those people are going to be, right? Like I don't want to be stuck with all Toronto people just because I have to be in Toronto. I want to go to Halifax, where I think very good customer service exists in Halifax, for example, right? So that's one reason why we've been, like I said, geographically agnostic. But the other thing it allows us to do is it actually removes a ton of bias when you're remote. So when I talk to someone, for example, I'm never talking to them with I never do video chats and all that stuff, because what I really want is I want the minimum amount of bias or distraction to enter sort of my purview. So as a result, Wagepoint, I'm happy to say, looks nothing like a typical tech company at all. Yeah, and I say this because I know homogeneity is a huge problem in tech.
Yes.
Our culture, like this is another thing that I was telling you, we don't talk about this stuff enough because our heads are always down and we're busy grinding. But we're almost, I think, 50-50 on diversity in terms of gender. We have multiple age groups working. So I'm talking about, I think, I don't want to call out our oldest employee, but there's people over 60, and then there's people in their 20s.
Wow.
working together. Yeah. My co-founders are both, one of them is, 20 years older than I am. The other one is 15 years older than I am. So very multi-generational in the way we have approached the business. We have multiple ethnicities, multiple ethnicities. I can't even name the different ethnicities that we have. And the thing that we do that at least I think is kind of unique is we have folks in rural communities as well, not just in urban centers. And this one has been particularly interesting because this was very deliberate for us. We sort of like I was interviewing someone a few years ago, and you talk to people in tech, and there's sort of a certain like a cadence to the way that they sound and they talk, and they always sound kind of urban and very like hipstery.
Yes.
And then I was talking to this woman, and she was clearly from a smaller community in Canada, and I was like, this is sort of one of those times when I'm pretty sure I had a bias as well, because she was going to be on a call with a ton of customers, and I was like, well, what is that going to feel like for the customer? And then I had to override that by thinking, well, one of like this wonderful woman, she was amazing, by the way, but like I said, just didn't some of the qualifiers were just different. And I thought about how she has kids, and her kids are going to be like, oh, so you're working for a tech company, and to have those as options for people inside of rural communities or like smaller, really isolated communities, those are almost impossible, right? It's impossible for them to access because so many of these tech companies, they are all in the centers. So that, and she's an awesome teammate. Like, she's done a great job, but it takes that kind of dedication to decide that I'm going to do this for the company, because I obviously have to care for the company as well, but also because these are not short-term decisions. Some of these are going to be multi-generational decisions, and it's our job to think about it even in that kind of lens. So even for us, like we've tried to do things like that have actually paid dividends. So I'm pretty happy about that.
Well, appreciate it. Thank you for sharing that, Shrad. That's really great. I'm always in awe, as I said before we jumped on, and really proud and happy in terms of the successes you've grown. And what I really interested is what you are doing, or what are some of the things that you do that ensure that you continually to grow as a business leader, as a CEO, starting from a small startup to reaching almost 100 employees. Like, how are you growing as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, it's a continuous process, right? I reflect a lot. Like I spend time actually, like I will often say in meetings, like, okay, let me go meditate on that problem. And I'm not actually going away to, close my eyes and meditate, but I'm spending time not doing something and actually thinking. And I feel like that's something, because we're so used to the idea that only when I'm sending an email am I actually doing something, or only when I'm, talking to someone on the phone am I actually doing something. But that's just all the outputs of what you're doing. The actual thing that's happening is inside of you, right? Where you're thinking. And I spend time thinking, which is, and in fact, more and more as I get further into the leadership journey, I am constantly evolving my position. So, for example, obviously, something you can't sit and think like for half a week on a problem when you have 10 customers, right? You just can't. You have to be in hustle mode at that time. Always. But as you get bigger, you have to be more strategic about your moves. Just like when you're playing a chess game, in the first few little while, you're just sort of making quick moves. And then as you get further in and now there's fewer pieces to play with, you're like, I should really think about this a little bit more, right? So that's really, I mean, like I said, giving yourself the time to think is very important. And then I'm very, very easy to approach and give feedback to, even if it's negative. And I'm totally cool with that. I don't really get offended easily. Sometimes my ego gets a little prickly and I feel a little like, blah, blah, blah. But I try to control that as much as possible. So that's another thing. I want to stay close to the ground as much as possible and not fly away with the success. And I think that's another thing that will always benefit me and help me do better.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. I mean, it's always important to sit with things and take time for yourself. And a lot of us, especially in the startup culture ecosystem, may not even take the time. They talk about it, right, Shrad? But to actually to have the discipline to do that, it is super important. Just real quickly, I'd love it if you could maybe give a shout out or name a person that had a tremendous impact as you as a business leader.
Yeah, actually, my dad actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he passed away a few years ago, but it's actually the way he sort of brought us up was to be very inclusive and very much in the idea of building a community and taking care of everybody in that community, not just yourself.
Hmm.
And WagePoint is an ode to that, or rather, everything I do is an ode to the philosophy of my life, which has absolutely come from him.
Hmm. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I know I could say, like, a business leader,
Yeah.
but the truth is that your upbringing matters so much in this. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you think about yourself, okay, and I know this is about me, but let's turn the tables on you for just a second.
Yeah.
If you think about yourself and the decisions you've made in your business, how much of it has come from just who you are as a person, and who you are as a person has come a lot from, people like your parents and your siblings and your friends. So in reality, like, there's no business leader that is really experiencing what you're experiencing, but all those internal tools that have been given to you, that is, the exact origination point from that. And so that's why I said that like, I actually think about my dad as the person who's given me the most amount of perspective, and all of that perspective comes into the way I run the business.
That's great. Really having a blast here, Shrad. But before I got a couple more questions, but before I get to them, I'd love it if you could share anything that's going on in your world, something that you're excited about, maybe some upcoming news, milestones, something that you want to tell our community first, the product launches, anything else you wanted to share with us.
Well, so there's this few things we have in the works that our chief product officer would like find me and destroy me if I shared too early. So I can't do that. But what I can tell you is we recently, one of the things that we uncovered while, how you know what customer development is, I'm assuming, like when
Yes.
you are iterating with the customer. Yeah. And so we actually found that our system works really well for accountants or bookkeepers who want to have multiple customers who want to service multiple customers for payroll. So they put on 5, 10, 100 in some cases customers on our system, and they run their practice using our system. And recently we released an accountant dashboard that actually speaks to just that group of people. So we're actually getting better at segmenting some of these features and deciding how to support them as a group. So that's just something as a really nice shout out. And of course, that's a huge reason for that is our chief product officer, Lena, who has essentially done a great job at understanding the customer and delivering something that they actually can use and be excited about.
Well, very cool. And we'll be sure to list these links on the episode page, Shrad, and that's super exciting as well. Before we end, Shrad, I'd love it if you could, share some final thoughts, observations. Ideally, what I like to give out is actionable recommendations that you could share with those who are listening today.
Yeah, I mean, actionable recommendations. I guess it really depends on where would you say your audience typically are at in terms of where are they starting a business? Are they somewhere in the middle? Are they, about to retire?
There's a number of them, but I would say for who you are and what you're doing, for those who are leading and growing a business that's scaling, what are you learning today that you could share to those in a similar situation, whether they're the co-founder or not, right? Because it could be an executive.
Yep, I totally understand. I mean, I think that, to your point, all of us think that we need to spend more time sort of really reflecting on our thoughts and actions, but we are so busy that we don't always do that. I think that there is a huge amount of emphasis on culture, but to be deliberate about it and to live that every day is really a decision you have to make as a leader. a lot of times culture at some point will become it won't be top down anymore. It'll be your employees basically building the culture, but you have to live it. So that's just something that, and I know this is again an esoteric comment, right? This isn't like, go invest more in SEO and see what happens. But I think at the leadership level, you're actually motivating and you're convincing a group of people to get up every day and give it everything they've got. Mm-hmm. And to do that, you have to give them a good reason to do that. And for me, that reason is so that they'll know you're always there for them. Knowing that you are there for them is super important. And to do that, you have to live all the values that you have asked them to live. And that's really my best insight.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you, Shrad. To close, can you tell us where we can find more information about you, Wagepoint, or anything else you'd like to share with us today?
Well, I mean, you could definitely go to wagepoint.com and sign up to have us help you with payroll. I hope that is something that everyone can able to do, so that I continue to be able to hire people and make happier Canadians. I think because most of our workforce is Canadian, but yeah, please come check out Wagepoint. If you want to check me out or connect with me on LinkedIn, you'll find me, Shrad Rao. I would say that's the other best place to get in touch. Otherwise, I hope someone out there has actually benefited from listening to me speak from from an EQ standpoint and not fully an IQ one. Not always, I should say.
It was great. I really enjoyed it. But Shrad, again, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us on the Business Leadership Podcast.
Thank you, Edwin. I appreciate you having me on.
That's it, Biz Leaders. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Business Leadership Podcast. This was episode 146 with Shrad Rao. If you want to learn more about Shrad, Wagepoint, or anything else that we discussed, please go to the episode website at thebusinessleadership.com/146. Do join me on my private Facebook group where I will discuss this episode, answer your questions, and connect you with other like-minded business leaders. Simply search for the Business Leadership Group directly in the Facebook. Thank you again to our episode sponsor, Slingshot VoIP, a Canadian telecommunications leader in business voice over IP services. Slingshot understands the growing needs of business leaders and partners with you to ensure that your company is aligned with your vision, growth, and sustainability of the future. And lastly, if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe, rate, and leave a comment on your favorite podcast player. Thank you again. Edwin signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Business Leadership Podcast at thebusinessleadership.com.